Welcome to the Redeeming Stories podcast. I'm Julie M. Lane. Today's conversation addresses a form of abuse that many people still struggle to recognize, understand, and even describe. Not because it is rare, but it is often hidden beneath appearances, status, charm, and control. We are talking about coercive control. So often when people think about domestic abuse, they only think about the physical violence. But for many women, including myself, and those involved with sophisticated or highly respected individuals, abuse can take forms that are far more subtle and difficult to explain. It can look like manipulation, intimidation, isolation, surveillance, gaslighting, financial control, or just simply the slow erosion of a person's confidence, autonomy, and sense of reality. Today, I'm joined by Ruth Darlene, founder and executive director of WomenSV, in other words, Women Survivor Voices, an internationally recognized nonprofit educational center focused on coercive control and domestic abuse. Since founding WomenSV in 2011, Ruth has personally supported more than 1,500 survivors and trained thousands of professionals across healthcare, law, cybersecurity, education, and advocacy spaces. Her work focuses on helping survivors, communities recognize the lethality and long-term impact of coercive control, particularly when there may be no visible evidence of harm. In this conversation, we'll talk about warning signs, subtle forms of abuse, the effect on women and children, and what recovery can look like after living in environments where power and control quietly shape daily lives. This is a difficult but deeply important conversation. So thank you, Ruth, for being here today.
Thank you so much, Julie, for inviting me. And that was such a lovely introduction. I feel like you've really said it all. I think we can wrap it up now.
Thank you. Thank you. But let's keep going.
Okay.
I,
All right.
I know that even your words today will help me as I continue to work on my journey.
Oh, thank you. I'll
But let's
try.
just get started with the basic. Talk about the term coercive control and what that
Okay.
means and why it's important for other people to understand what it means.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's a great place to start because I've just heard people beginning to mention the term in the last year or so. And even when I do presentations and trainings for therapists, because they get so little to no training on coercive control, and I asked them to give me a definition. One said almost tongue in cheek, when I asked her to define what coercive control was, she said, "Well, it's control that's very coercive," which is not all that enlightening. So, a coercive control, if we look at it, it's a pattern. It's a pattern of threatening, isolating, controlling behavior that robs an intimate partner of their freedom and forces them to live in fear, and is also a lethality risk, as you mentioned in the introduction, with or without a prior history of physical or sexual violence. And all of this can be so hard for the average person to grasp, even the average
Mhm.
victim of this type of what should be a crime to grasp. And I use the word victim not as in victim mentality, but as a crime victim. Just as you'd be the victim of a drive-by shooting or a theft, there is such threat involved in living with somebody that engages in coercive control. And they, as you were mentioning, they erode, erase, and rob you of so many different parts of yourself and your life and your very identity. I call it the ultimate form of identity theft because it takes everything away from you that you were before getting into this relationship. If you felt independent and creative and spontaneous and full of self-esteem and happiness and hope, and if you're very successful and accomplished and ambitious, many sophisticated abusers see that sort of woman as a challenge. So it's not just women that come from difficult relationships or childhoods. It could be you at the peak of your performance and career that makes you very attractive to someone like this.
When you were sharing that, I was thinking too, it's even a bit about being the trophy wife, of being excellent, being well educated. I know there was an expectation of a previous partner that you had to have at least a master's degree. And the fact that I had a doctoral degree made me even more valuable to have on his arm.
So, Julie, I've got a question. The very things that he was first praising you for, did you find over time that they became sources of attack or questioning or criticism or judgment, like questioning your intellect or your accomplishments or your ability to function outside the relationship with him? Because I find that has happened with many of the women that I worked with, that their abuser would take the very things that they initially praised about them in the beginning and work to sort of erode them over time.
Absolutely, especially when I stepped into what he felt he was the expert on. If I would question something, it, not as in, why in the world are you doing that? Question it as in, teach me. I want to know more. I'm not quite sure what you're telling me. Because I'm a lifelong learner, and I would often get attacked for crossing that line and being told to I don't know what I'm talking about. And I remember too, off and on, telling him that you make me feel stupid just by the way he would talk to me.
There it is, because clearly you're a brilliant woman. I don't know if he had a PhD, but sometimes it can be very competitive. And if you, if your intellect is one of the things that makes you who you are, that's a part of your identity that becomes vulnerable to attack by someone like this. And they also like to think of themselves as the smartest guy in the room, and unfortunately, they often are, but not always. And I'm. Uh, as we're having our discussion today, I think we're going to hear each other say he for perpetrator and she for victim or survivor. But I do want to make it clear that men can be victims of abuse, women can be perpetrators. It can happen in gay relationships in the LGBTQ community. And I think whatever we're talking about today, and whoever's listening, no matter what kind of relationship they're in and who with, it doesn't matter race, religion, income level, profession, where you come from in the world, the dynamics of power and control and coercive control are very similar across all demographics. So there'll be something that they can glean from our discussion today, that this sort of partner, they want to be this, they have to be in control at all times. It's all about power and control, the abuse of power in order to control an intimate partner. And they like to be the authority in every area, even in areas where they know very little about.
Absolutely. And first, Ruth, thank you very much for bringing that up. That is a really key point. It's an important point. And it's something I recognize. And I've had people reach out to me on Instagram or Facebook and saying, can I join? I'm a man, but can I be here? And absolutely. If you've been through this, it's the same experience for all of us.
May I just point out one caveat though?
Yes.
Because if we're dealing with the covert abuser, like there are obvious forms of coercive control. I talk about it as a pattern, and it's often thought of as a pattern where you have to connect the dots and read between the lines and look at context. But there can be isolated incidents that we think of typically as domestic violence that also qualify as coercive control, where the hands go on the throat or there's a gun pointed to the head. That's getting to be a very severe kind of control, but it can happen in lots of different areas, and the mo can look different. It can look
Mhm.
from either extreme or subtle, but no matter whether it's a gun to the head or you don't want to see me mad, you'd be amazed at what can happen if you cross the line. We want to be able to look at the subtle forms of abuse that include gaslighting. And unfortunately, um, fortunately or unfortunately, we have statistics on our side when we believe women who are reaching out for help because they are authentically a survivor of coercive control. Unfortunately, if somebody is a covert abuser, they can present the mask of being a victim of this type of abuse when in fact they just want to wheedle their way into the inner sanctum of a support group where they can learn the tricks of the trade and and use that as a way to manipulate and exploit, control, and punish people in their private life. So I say that because if a man is reaching out to you for help and support, I'd be very careful about having men join a group that where there's mixed genders. Um, and I realize at the same time puts men in a very difficult position because there's so few shelters for men, so few support groups for men who've been abused by other men or with female partners even. And my heart goes out to them. My area of expertise is in heterosexual women in relationships with abusive men, but many of those men have pretended to be victims so they
Mhm.
could get a restraining order against the true victim, or get her arrested, or get a restraining order against her so that they could end up with custody of the children. So that's the wolf in sheep's clothing that we have to be very wary of.
Absolutely. I completely agree. It's one of the reasons why I monitor things so closely
Good for you.
on my platforms, because I've lived the experience long enough to know, for the most part, I'm not an expert by any means, but for the most part, I can pretty much gauge someone and what they're up to. But going back, when you think of, that affluent environment that we've touched on earlier, and someone being, they feel they need to be this in the spotlight consistently, even though their partner, their spouse, has a great deal to offer as well and has their own skill set, their own talents, their own accomplishments. I have experienced that partner still needing to be on stage with me, needing to have the microphone, even though they have absolutely nothing to do with what's going on. They're just there as an observer, to be there as supportive. Can we talk about how, just talk about that idea, that concept a bit?
Yes. Well, there's a personality type called the dark tetrad. And Reed Malloy he's a forensic psychologist who has a specialty in psychopathy. And after I asked him after one of his lectures, are you able to tell if somebody's lying with all your training? A forensic psychologist with many years in the practice. And he said, even a seasoned professional cannot tell a seasoned liar. And so you get these individuals who have this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of persona, and that's the Machiavellian piece that goes into the dark tetrad. So one piece of the four personality types that goes into the dark tetrad is Machiavellian. In addition to being this one face in public and the other behind closed doors, have the appearance of honesty, the better. So the easier you can get away with doing dishonest things when nobody is looking. But also they exploit people. They're manipulative. They will go after your strengths as well as your weaknesses. You are comfortable speaking in front of other people. You're an authority on a certain issue, and it should be you up there. And they often have this sense of like jealousy that you have taken the limelight over them and will work very hard to discredit you, undermine you, take your place. So that is that manipulative, cunning, exploitive side of that's the Machiavellian component of the dark tetrad. There's also the narcissistic piece. And I'm not a therapist. I was trained as a domestic violence advocate, but I do lots of trainings for therapists because they get so little training in the area of coercive control or even domestic violence for that matter. And unfortunately, there are therapists that are very well trained and trauma informed, but there are also many that tend to think of domestic violence as a communication issue instead of a crime. There's the only two parties here are the victim and offender. So it's not like, oh, it takes two to tango, not that at all. So, but with the narcissist, it's very much a life as a zero sum game approach to everything. If you're getting attention, that means he's not getting attention. If you're making money, that means he's not making money. If you are getting ahead, he's getting further behind. He measures his success by how much further ahead he is than you, and having to be the center of attention, having the limelight, the spotlight always be on him, and somewhat lacking in empathy, like emotionally very immature. He wants what he wants when he wants it, and if that is being up on stage with the microphone and not you, you better give it to him, or there'll be hell to pay afterwards. So sometimes I say, imagine a 4-year-old emotionally speaking, trapped in the body of a 200-pound man. But when your kid is 4 years old and they're having a temper tantrum, you can pick them up and put them in a timeout. But what do you do when it's a 200-pound man? So that sort of disconnect with the narcissistic piece where they have to be the center of attention all the time. And they're also very good at playing the victim and making you the bad guy all the time. And then we have the psychopathic part. So we're getting into the third element of the dark tetrad, the Machiavellian, narcissistic, and now psychopathic part. When I describe behaviors to an audience full of therapists, and I describe the behaviors, and I say, I'm not a therapist, I can't use diagnostic labels, but you can. Invariably, they always give back to me these diagnostic labels that include psychopathic. And that is lying easily and often, even when you don't need to, not having any real moral compass, having a low fear response. Uh, um, just not having this sort of moral compass, this integrity, where it's about getting what they want when they want it, exploiting others, lying if they have to in order to get it. And then there is this piece that makes it the sadistic part, and that is seeming to derive pleasure or satisfaction either out of witnessing or causing pain or fear or suffering to the very people they should be protecting the most. So when you start to add that element, and I know like we live in the 21st century and people don't really talk about evil so much anymore. I really couldn't do this work without understanding it's kind of the age-old battle between good and evil. And it's like you have this, glass of pristine water and you put a drop of evil, a drop of India ink in it, and it's going to diffuse throughout the whole glass. And you don't, once somebody is starting to enjoy what they're doing to you and really getting that little twinkle in their eye when they've hurt you or won the argument or put one over on you or caused you fear or suffering, once you've gone down that road, it's about protecting yourself from this kind of person. It's not about working it out. It's not about the usual techniques you've been taught to use your assertive statements or try to set boundaries. They will see that as a threat to their control over you. So it's basically it's their way or the highway.
Absolutely. As you were talking, Ruth, I was thinking about an incident, and maybe you can shed some light on this for me. Um, First, a partner didn't feel they were responsible for their behavior. It was the result of how others behaved around them. And then, secondly, that I was to apologize for my behavior, which set him off. And yet, my behavior of saying, I'm going to call the sheriff if you don't stop, he wants me to apologize for. And yet, he's fully um, in the clear on being able to erupt and rage as he did.
Oh, I have so much to say about that, Julie. Thank you for raising such an important point. So when I was describing the dark tetrad, I mentioned things like lying, but there's also this lack of self reflection, lack of remorse, and always needing to blame others, never taking responsibility or accountability for any harm done. In fact, projecting onto others the very thing that they have done. So they make you the abuser, you the manipulator, you the one that's making them walk on eggshells. And that kind of behavior is called DARVO: deny, attack, reverse, victim and offender, DARVO. And these guys are just real expert at it. The risk of warning a partner that you're going to do X if they don't stop doing Y is they will beat you to the punch because it's very much first to market wins in their eyes. For them, it's a very Darwinian world. It's kill or be killed, crush the competition. You don't want to feel sorry for your competition. You want to crush the competition. They're very much often lacking in empathy. And it's almost the opposite of empathy. There's this passage in Corinthians that defines what love is. Love is patient, love is kind, love keeps no record of wrongs. That is like 2,000 years later, it's a fabulous definition of what love is and what it looks like. It's not just a word. And for women to say, "Oh, but he says he loves me," or "But I think I still love him." What does that look like? If you flip that passage on its head impatient, unkind, cruel, keeps a record of wrongs, delights in evil. There is abuse staring you in the face. 2,000 years later, we have the definition of love and flip it on its head. And that's what abuse looks like. And if you are trying to warn somebody, trying to set a boundary, remember what happens when you try to set a boundary? Don't treat me like this or X will happen. They see that as a challenge to their authority, to their control, and they will work very hard to flip the tables and make you the bad guy, you the problem. And using gaslighting, they'll get inside your head and make you doubt that what you thought they said or did, maybe you didn't really see it the way they meant it or the way it actually happened. That's that kind of gaslighting designed to make you question your memory, your perspective, and over time, your sanity. And then giving them a heads up about what you'll do if they don't respect your boundary. You're telling them where to insert the sword, how to attack you. And I had one woman who threatened to. I don't work with survivors anymore directly. I just focus on training providers. But when I was working with a survivor directly, she threatened to call the police on her abuser, and if he didn't stop. And he said, "Okay, I'll stop." And he left the room. And 20 minutes later, they see a police car pulled up in front. And then he runs out to them and tells them that she has been threatening to kill him and waving a gun around and all sorts of other things. And he's afraid of her. And she ends up getting slapped in restraints and taken off to jail. So all the regular rules of dealing with a regular reasonable person fly out the window when you're dealing with this category of human being. That's why on such a mission to educate providers, therapists, police, judges, attorneys. Everybody needs more training in this type of personality profile because the regular rules don't apply in dealing with them. For now, for somebody involved with this type of person, it's about protecting yourself and protecting your children from this type of abuse because the children will be the ultimate casualties of this kind of relationship.
Absolutely. So let's switch back to the other side. Let's talk about the survivor a bit. How to communicate again, how to get our voice back. So how do we take that power back over the story and to communicate that story?
Yeah, I love that question. The purpose of coercive control is to rob you of your personal power. That transfer of power. Remember, I was talking about life as a zero-sum game. He wants to take your power away from you so he can have more. And so what is the antidote to that? It's taking your power back. But how do you take it back if, for example, there's not been a lot of physical violence or perhaps any? What if it's been almost all psychological aggression? Financial abuse, technological stalking. Like, what if it's very hard to point to forensic evidence about what's happened to you? That's when you start with how you feel, like what's going on inside me. I feel frightened. I feel like I have to edit my conversation all the time. I feel trapped, isolated, controlled. But what is it that's making me feel that way? So, um, because it's so hard to explain the types of abuse that don't have forensic evidence to it, I created this course called Understanding and Documenting Coercive Control. I had so many survivors saying, "Gosh, if only he had beaten me, I'd have evidence of what he did. I would understand that this was abuse." But for many survivors, it took them years to come to that epiphany that this was abuse. They couldn't control it. They couldn't change it. There wasn't something that she could do to make things stop. And I found that the smarter these women were, the more empathy they had, the more perseverance, the more self reflection they were capable of, the longer they'd tend to stay thinking there was something that they could do to work things out and make the relationship better. And of course, he would make her think the same thing. He would minimize his abuse. She would maximize her responsibility. He would expect her to give and give and give. And so she would because she's a giving person, and he would take and take and take. So that's his idea of a give and take relationship, a give and take. She gives, he takes. So once she gets to the point of understanding, yes, this is abuse. I'm afraid this can't go on. Something terrible is going to happen. She may feel like she's slowly dying inside, and we can talk about, the impact on survivors. But taking her story back begins with being able to understand what has happened to me. Why has it had this effect on my whole personality, on my life, on my feeling of being free in the world? Then how do I explain it to others to get the help and support I need? So that's why I created this course. It's an online course. It's on our website, womensv.org, SV for Survivor Voices, as you said, and also for Silicon Valley, because that's where I started this program and served so many women that were trapped with doctors, lawyers, CEOs, celebrities, and they were doctors, lawyers, CEOs, celebrities themselves, but that's not going to save you from your personal life, no matter how accomplished you are in the outside world. You need to start developing a vocabulary around these unseen forces, these invisible things that have happened to you that are making you feel like you're being dismantled from the inside out. So it's not a question of intelligence, it's a question of education. And so many women felt this sense of shame, like I'm so accomplished in so many different areas of my life. And I've been silent for so many years because of that shame. And because I'm afraid to reach out that, I'm successful, I'm educated, I live in a nice house, who's going to believe me? And even if I do reach out, well, often these women fall through the cracks because on paper it looks like their household income, they're doing just fine. And they don't realize that no amount of money or professional advancement is going to stop a bullet or a knife or feeling like you're dying slowly within. So, in this course, they start to develop a vocabulary around more subtle forms of abuse, start to understand why they are feeling trapped, isolated, threatened, controlled. And then they are able, through all the documents that they go through, to create a 2 to 3 page summary that they can adapt according to their audience and goals, depending on who they're reaching out to for help. Is it a therapist? Is it a friend? Do they just want to understand for themselves? It's not meant as legal advice, so but they could still use it to organize their thoughts prior to reaching out to an attorney.
Great. Thank you, Ruth. As you were talking about that giving, um, I got to a point where I literally said to myself, "The well is dry, and unless you refill the well, there's nothing left to give." That's when I knew I was done. I just couldn't do it anymore. So, Ruth, as we wrap up our time together, what are some final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Um, I guess a word about the impact on children, and then another to offer hope, because
Okay.
without hope, nothing else matters. um, the impact on children, abuse is a learned behavior. And even if a child is not being abused directly in the home, when a child grows up in a home and watches the way dad is treating mom or mom is treating dad or they're treating each other, sometimes women will say, yes, he's terrible to me, but the kids love him and he's such a great dad. And especially now going through the divorce, he's turning into this Disneyland dad. Um, so, one a response you might have to that kind of argument that he's such a great dad, even though if he's treating me terribly, is you really can't be a good father if you're not also teaching a child how a father treats a mother, how a husband treats a wife, how a man treats a woman. And so the child is growing up to see how to treat his own partner. And the danger is that the child is experiencing is risking turning into what he saw or she saw growing up. But there is that third choice. You can become a perpetrator, you could become a victim of this type of abuse, or you could decide, I never want to cause that kind of pain or suffering or hurt to anybody else. I am going to learn from what I saw and treat the people in my life with so much more care and empathy than I ever experienced growing up. So that is that third road that a child can come to, and that's what offers every child hope. And as an adult, if you've been in this type of relationship, even several or even for a very long time, there is always hope of recovery, of taking your story back, having language to put on it, breaking the silence, sharing with trusted friends and a trauma-informed therapist, and getting re-engaged in the world. There's this thing called the neuroplasticity of the brain. The brain can always form new connections. So no matter how old you are or how long it's been going on, there is always that hope of change and recovery. And let me just say too that there's plenty of good men in the world. You just want to learn to tell the difference between the ones who are pretending to be good and the ones who truly are good. And that's where education can make all the difference. Knowledge is power, and nowhere is that more true than in the area of coercive control.
Ruth, thank you. I haven't heard in a long time that there are still good men in the world. I've kind of taken a step back and said, let's educate myself a bit more so I can identify who I want to be around and who I don't. As I reflect on this conversation with Ruth today, I keep returning to the idea that some of the most damaging forms of harm are also the hardest to see. Coercive control often leaves people questioning themselves long before they ever question the relationship. It slowly reshapes reality, identity, confidence, and voice. And because so much of it happens quietly, survivors are often left carrying not only the pain of what happened, but the burden of trying to prove it. Ruth, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you, Julie. It's been an honor, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. So until next time, this is Julie M. Lane, and this is the Redeeming Story Podcast.